Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Chuck Holton here. And we've had rockets flying over Jerusalem out of Gaza. This is that's the important part. Actual rockets made it from Gaza to Jerusalem over the past 24 hours. Now, we haven't had a rocket make it out of Gaza and all the way to Jerusalem in about a year. It's been a long time. And so this is pretty significant. We're going to break it all down here in just a minute. And so I want you to stay tuned. Make sure you like and subscribe to CBN's YouTube channel. And we'll get into all the details as well as all the other things that are going on in Israel right now, like Netanyahu just had surgery, and that was kind of serious. There are things going on up in Syria. There's a lot happening in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria that needs to be covered, and so we're gonna get to it all. I'm Chuck Holton, and if you are just joining us and have not followed CBN's YouTube channel before, we do these live broadcasts on a basically daily basis here, and I do them also over at Chuck Holton at the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube. You can go to chuckholton.com to see more videos about what we're talking about, but we have figured out that it is not profitable to show videos on these lives because the algorithm that YouTube has actually will demonetize us if you show other videos while you're live. And even if they're not graphic or violent or anything. So just to be careful, I put those videos, any other videos that I would be showing you, we'll look at maps and things like that on this live, but any other videos that I could show you, including some that have gotten pretty ridiculously graphic out of Syria, I'll put those up over at chuckholton.com. You can go over there and see them. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Hope you had a great weekend and happy Monday to you. As I said, on Sunday, there were two missiles that flew out of Gaza and were intercepted over Jerusalem. So the alarms went off across Jerusalem. Like I said, that's the first time. It's not the first time in a year that they've had alarms go off over Jerusalem, but it is the first time in a year that those alarms were due to anything fired out of Gaza. We have not seen a ton of rockets or missiles being fired out of Gaza lately. As I mentioned several times before, it is more like it's actually they've had fewer rockets out of Gaza than they did before January. I'm sorry, before October 7th, before the war started, and so that's why people who were uh, refugees in their own country, out of their homes and staying in hotels for almost a year, have now gone back to their homes in southern Israel, in places like Sderot and Ashkelon and some of the kibbutzim along the border, because it's safer now than it was before the war started. However, that doesn't mean that there are nothing. There's nothing happening in Gaza. Obviously, we've still got 101 hostages, and maybe 60 of those are still alive if we're lucky. They've been engaging in peace talks or ceasefire talks. Uh, Israel, I mean, it's all shuttle diplomacy. So Israel's not talking to Hamas. Hamas is not talking to anybody except the Qataris and the Egyptians. But basically, you have talks going on between the Americans and the Qataris and the Egyptians. And America is talking to Israel, yeah, you get it. So in those talks, Hamas has recently said that they need a 6-day ceasefire just to try and find the hostages because they don't even know where the hostages are at this point, uh, which is kind of scary. And So what's happening in Gaza is that the IDF has recently cleared out Jabalia, like big time. There's not much left in Jabalia but rubble. And they've moved through northern part of Gaza, Gaza City, and have moved into the central part of Gaza yet again to continue to fight what's left of Hamas and PIJ. And there's still plenty of fighting happening in there every day. They are losing, I would say, on average, one IDF soldier a day in Gaza. So obviously, there's a lot of dangerous stuff happening there, and they are continuing to make progress, finding more weapons caches, taking out more terrorists. For example, there's a hospital in northern Gaza. It was the last operating hospital in that region, and the IDF went in and cleared out the hospital, and they I interviewed, I guess, more than 300, I'm sorry, more than 900 uh, people who were in and around the hospital. Of those 900 people, about 300 of them were actual terrorists, and 15 of them were known terrorists who had participated in October 7th. And so it's obvious that that hospital was being used for military purposes. The IDF essentially closed the hospital and made it so that they burned it out. It can't be used anymore. And that's because they just keep having trouble with Hamas using every school, every hospital, every mosque as a headquarters, a place to hide, a place to store military equipment, etc. And that makes it a legitimate target. Now, you won't hear that from the mainstream media. The only thing you'll hear in the mainstream media is that Israel burned down the only operating hospital in northern Gaza. How could they? Well, they could because there were 300 terrorists hiding inside, and that makes it a military target. It's unfortunate for the people of Gaza. All of this is unfortunate for the people of Gaza, but that's the way it goes. So I'm interested to see where you're all coming in from. We have people that watch from all around the world. And so just put a chat in the chat box, would you? And tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to see all that. And while you're at it, hit the like button. Uh, Now, as Israel moved down into central and southern Gaza, there are lots of people who started filtering back into northern Gaza, even though Israel was saying it's not safe to go back to northern Gaza. There's no services there. There's no electricity. There's no running water. There's no electrical. I'm sorry. There's no like garbage pickup or internet or anything like that. Thank you. Maine, Texas, Wisconsin, Valdosta, Georgia, Southern Idaho, Southern California, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Las Vegas. Awesome. Oh, there's somebody from the UK, somebody from Israel. Great. So as they moved south out of Jabalia and Gaza City, people started filtering back into northern Gaza, and that's when these missiles started flying. So on Saturday, they had two missiles that, as I said, flew. Um, wait, I might have got that backwards. No, I think Saturday they had two missiles that flew toward Jerusalem, and Sunday they had five more missiles that flew toward the border communities in Sderot and Ashkelon, that area. No, they were all either shot down or landed in open areas. There were no injuries reported, but this is concerning because most of these flew out of Beit Hanun. Now, I want to show you on the map where that is because this is a problem here. Let's go over to the map and we'll go to Beit Hanun. Okay, so here's Sderot right here, and Beit Hanun is the first neighborhood across the line inside Gaza. So this area right here is where the rockets were flying from. And what now? Look, we've seen the rockets that have flown out of Gaza or within Gaza over the past couple of months. Most of them have been very small rockets. What I mean by that is they are, let's see here. We got to fix this so I can see you, or you can see me, I guess. For some reason, I have to reset my camera every time. Okay. Um, so the rockets that we've seen out of Gaza or fired from Gaza lately have been very small. We're talking about like 2 feet long, 3 feet long, maybe about this big around, more like artillery shells that are self propelled. And even if they hit something, it wouldn't do a lot of damage. I mean, it'd blow up a car, it'd blow up part of an apartment if it hit it, but they're still dangerous. They certainly can still kill people. And they're firing them without the traditional launcher arrays that they had before. So before they had racks that they would put these things in, metal welded racks that they could aim very precisely. They'd bring out a level and they had, do the calculations and they would aim them so they would certainly hit at least the town they were aiming at, like Sderot or Ashkelon. Now they don't have any of that. So those small ones, there's videos coming out of them propping them up on like bags of aid from UNRWA or aid from the UN. And then they just light them like you'd light a firecracker. And then they just hopefully will fly somewhere toward Israel. Now, most of the rockets that have been fired in Gaza the last couple of months have been fired at Gaza. They're firing them at IDF troops that are operating inside Gaza. So it is like a mortar round or a artillery shell. But a few have flown out of Gaza, and there have not been any deaths or major injuries from them. But still, it's annoying, and it's just proof that Israel's not done yet inside Gaza. They still got to keep fighting. But the ones that were fired on Saturday were much larger missiles. These are probably about 10 inches in diameter and about 12 feet long. And they have to be fired from some sort of launcher. Now they could improvise launchers. I think. I mean, I've seen videos of them improvising launchers for these larger. It takes 3 people to carry one of these missiles. And they have much further range because of that. Also, a much heavier warhead, which could destroy an apartment or, definitely create some havoc. They likely were fired out of an underground launcher setup. Here's what they have done all across Gaza for many years. They've been digging these pits and putting launcher tubes into the pits, filling them with missiles that are pre-aimed, okay? And then they cover them over with a piece of plywood and cover them over with about 6 inches of dirt, and they know where they are, but they just leave them there. And so it's likely that there were some of these left that had not been found by the IDF, that they went, once the IDF left the area, they went and dug them up and uncovered them and fired them off. Now, Israel has eyes in the sky over pretty much every square inch of Gaza uh, almost all the time. And so they saw these things where they were launched from, and they immediately put the word out that everybody in northern Gaza should evacuate because they were about to strike back. And whether or not they evacuate is up to them. They don't force them. But once they've put the word out, then about 30 minutes later, they blow up the launch area. Now, many times these launches come from within designated safe zones that Israel has created for people to go to so that they won't be a part of the fighting. And those are the ones that Hamas and the PIJ actually carry the missiles into those areas on purpose, set them up inside a tent that was provided by the United Nations, and then fire them out of that, intentionally using civilians as human shields. So Israel has to go in there. They have to either drop a bomb on it or send troops in there to dismantle and destroy those. And so, again, you don't hear about that from the, you know, the mainstream media. So that let's move on from that, unless you have a question about it. Let me just look real quick. No, it's not. It's not breaking news. I'm sorry, it's not sensational. This is actual live. I mean, this is I am live right now, and we're talking about the rockets that fell on Jerusalem for the first time in a year since out of Gaza. Okay, one day, so not clickbait. Where's Rubina? I need to make Rubina. Oh no, Rubina, you're already a moderator here. You should be good. There's two different ways that you can turn up the volume on your video. I know some people have a hard time with this. You can turn up volume on your device, your computer or your phone, and then usually you can turn up the volume on the video itself as well. So if you hover your mouse over the video, you'll see the little speaker down at the bottom left-hand corner, and you can click on that and move the slider and turn it up that way too. Because my audio is pretty good. I'll turn my audio up a little bit if we got people complaining about it. But how about that? Is that better? I don't. The problem is we blow people out that have good speakers, so we have to kind of keep it toned down a little bit. Hi, Mom Marissa. Good to see you. That's the reason you have to have the volume all the way up, because we have the volume uh, modulated for people that have good, good speakers that are watching on their computers. Problem is, you got people watching on phones, TVs, uh, iPads, computers. Some people have additional speakers, so you're just going to have to deal with it. We're doing the best we can. With Trump's warning and Bibi UN speech, do you think it's looking better to get back the hostages? And is a one-state Israel solution more likely? Okay, harsh. Yes, it is looking better at right now that they will get some hostages out. That's if Hamas can actually find them, because, like I said, Hamas doesn't even know where the hostages are at this point. Many of them, and they have no communications in order to talk to one another, and that tells you something about how badly Hamas has been degraded. So that's good news for sure. So let's see here. All right. So I think we got all of the questions there. One state, uh, there's still people talking about two-state solution, one-state solution. Uh, Israel, neither Israel nor the Palestinians want a two-state solution. So a two-state solution is dead. It's not going to happen. That's all there is to say about that. Point, period, end of story. All right, let's talk about the Houthis. I'm going to be live on my channel over at the Hot Zone at the end of this live in about 30 minutes to talk about U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen. We just found this out. It hasn't been conclusively corroborated yet, but there is some initial reporting coming out that there are U.S. Special Operations troops on the ground in Yemen, and we're going to talk about it on my channel over at the Hot Zone at the top of the hour. But let's talk about what's happening in Yemen. Israel and the United States have both continued to strike in the Houthi areas of Yemen. And actually, the Houthis don't control as much of Yemen as most people think. Only about 25% of the country is under Houthi control. The problem is it's the 25% of the country that really matters because it's where most of the people live, except for Aden down in the south. Most of the big cities in most of the big cities in Yemen are under the control of the Houthis. And when they took over, the Houthis also took over most of the military bases and captured most of the troops that belonged to the to the Yemeni military. And so in one fell swoop, they took over the Yemeni army and made it the Houthi army. That's why they've got so much equipment. That and the fact that the Iranians have been supplying it to them for, the last several years, creating a proxy force. Now, the Houthis, despite all of the attacks on their country, last week the Israelis struck the port in Hodeidah. They struck the port. Uh, there was another port further north. There were two other places. They struck about 10 different sites around Yemen and struck in Sana'a. Took out the main power station, hit again the oil, uh, petroleum storage facilities. And so there's very little electricity in Yemen right now, and there's very little gasoline to be had in Yemen, which honestly, the people in Yemen are pretty much used to already. So it's not as bad a thing for them as it would be for us, who are used to having access to those kinds of things all the time. But even amidst all of the strikes that have been taking place on Yemen, the Houthis have continued to fire missiles at Israel. And the most recent one that just happened, yesterday or the day before, actually was shot down not by the Iron Dome system, not by an Arrow missile, not by a David Sling missile. It was shot down by a THAAD missile system that belonged to the United States. Now, this is significant. I'm going to explain why. The THAAD missile system, you might remember when President Biden moved a couple THAAD missile systems into Israel a few months ago, and along with it, several hundred U.S. troops. The reason that's significant is because now we've got U.S. troops on the ground in Israel that are engaging in a military defensive role. They're not the first U.S. troops. We already had U.S. troops uh, in Israel before that at a base in the Negev Desert. There's actually two different places down there. One of them is I'm sorry. They're two different places that are contiguous to each other. And we had about 200 troops there. Before they moved the THAAD missile system in, we had a very large antenna that could pick up the launches of missiles and aircraft from very far away. It was the tallest antenna, I believe, in Israel, and it was a part of a THAAD missile array. Okay. But we didn't have the actual missiles there until just a couple months ago. Then President Biden sent the missile systems in. Now, you need to understand a little bit about these missile systems to understand why this is so significant. The THAAD missile system was designed and was developed starting back in the 1980s as a part of the SDI initiative, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, that President Reagan touted in order to bankrupt the Soviet Union. The actual manufacturing of the THAAD missile system didn't start until George H.W. Bush was president in 1992, I think. But they have been America's sort of mainstay. If you want to liken it to Israel's Iron Dome system, that'd be pretty close. Actually, it's closer to their Arrow missile system, but um, it's America's sort of premier, uh, anti-missile defense missiles, and we didn't really need to deploy those in the United States. I know Donald Trump has talked about the U.S. needs a um, Iron Dome system. I don't know that we really do because the U.S. has large bodies of water on either side. We're not going to get missile strikes out of Canada. We're not going to get missile strikes out of Mexico. So we don't really need to worry about missiles flying at the United States. If a country did shoot missiles at the United States, we have aircraft that we could put up in time to shoot those missiles down. So we don't really need like THAAD missile systems arrayed all over America in Cleveland and Dallas, places like that, because they're just not going to get used. It's just not necessary. But these things have been used in places like South Korea, which is right on the border, as you know, with the Rocket Man, Kim Jong-un. And they've been deployed in places like the UAE, and I've seen them on the ground in Poland during the war in Ukraine. Matter of fact, if you fly into Sheshu, I don't know it's Rzezow or something like that. Sheshu, I think is how they say it. It's the main airport where they transport military materiel from Europe and the United States to truck it into Ukraine. There are Patriot missile batteries and stuff all around there. So between Patriot and THAAD missile system, that's what the U.S. has to offer. The THAAD missile system is a longer range anti-missile system that can actually shoot down missiles in space. So it's pretty high tech for 1992. It's had some software updates and things like that. So, it's got a pretty good range on it. However, here's the crazy thing. We've had these things since 1992, and they have never been used in combat. This is why Harsh says Kim is more like Fruit Loops than Rocket Man. This is why this is so significant. I mean, this is why I say that we don't really need these things all over the United States. We've had them since 1992, and they've never been used in combat before until now. So why did the THAAD missile system shoot down this Houthi missile that was coming toward Israel? Why didn't they use the Arrow missile system or something like that? Uh, First of all, they would have to use something that could shoot down missiles from long range. I mean, it's more dangerous to let them get into Israeli airspace and then shoot them down. These ones apparently did make it into Israeli airspace and were shot down over Israel. So why did they use the THAAD missile system? Well, I think they just used it because the United States said, hey, can we get the next one? We would really like to be able to sell these THAAD missile systems as having been proven in combat. And we've literally never fired one since 1992 in the state of war. So Israel's like, okay, you can have the next one. Go ahead. I mean, we all know that the Houthis are pretty ridiculous. They have managed to make a real nuisance of themselves in Israel, but they really haven't caused much damage. I think one person has died from Houthi missile strikes, and there have been some people wounded, but not many. So it's really just something that the world is going to have to deal with. I mean, they're going to have to go after the Houthis, and this is why, like I said, I've been doing some more digging into the initial reports that came out yesterday that there are now U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen, and I'm going to talk about that at length after this live over on my Hot Zone YouTube channel. So go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton and subscribe over there, and you can watch that live where I'm going to be talking about that. But I've got too much to give you on this live, so I'll just say that there are reports that there are U.S. and French special forces on the ground in Yemen. And again, we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes over on my channel. But in the meantime, I the other explanation that's being offered for the fact that the United States shot down the incoming Houthi missile was that they were recalibrating the Arrow missile system and doing a software update. And so the U.S. THAAD missile system was covering for them while they were doing that. That's certainly possible as well. But here's something that ought to make your blood boil. Al Jazeera. How many of you know what country's government runs Al Jazeera? Al Jazeera is a state-owned company. What state owns them? Now put it in the comments there. I'll give you just a second. Take a guess. Who owns Al Jazeera? Whew. Drinking my bone broth here. I like that. I've gotten really fond of that bone broth. It's cold when it's cold out. Yep, Corey nailed it. Qatar. That's right. Guitar. Nothing else to lose, says guitar. Yeah. Yep, it's Qatar. You're right. Al Jazeera is owned by Qatar, who is supposedly a trusted partner of the Americans. If not an ally, they're a trusted partner in the region. And yet, guess what Al Jazeera just did? They went out and bought some commercially available satellite data, satellite imagery of southern Israel, and figured out the exact coordinates of the THAAD missile system that is out in the Negev desert. Now, I've been to this spot. I've been to this base, and when I went to film about it, I was careful to drive 30 minutes away from the base and then stand out in the desert with just dirt as a backdrop and talk about the the news about the US sending troops to Israel for the very reason that I didn't want to give away where they were. I didn't want anybody to be able to geolocate my footage or whatever and figure out where the base was. Now, it's not a top secret base by any stretch. I mean, if you drive around out there, you can find it. And you'll know you're getting close when you start seeing signs on the side of the road that say no photography or stopping, no stopping on the side of the road, and no photography, deadly force authorized, that kind of thing. And so it is possible to figure out where they are if you're just driving around Israel. But what the Qatari-owned Al Jazeera did was they got a grid coordinate, like a exact coordinate for the spot where this missile launcher, the THAAD missile launcher system was. And they published that grid coordinate. Now, in so doing, what you're doing is you're basically becoming a fire control officer for every hostile interest in the region. The Houthis, even Hamas, apparently, now has access not just to the area You can look on a Google map and you could probably figure out where the base is, but I'm talking about figuring out exactly where the missile system is located. I mean, this is unconscionable. A true journalism, you have to protect things like that. If you're, reporting on something like that, you don't tell bad people things they don't need to know. So these guys put out the grid coordinate, which most likely means that the United States is going to have to move that system and set it up somewhere else. If they don't, then the commander of that unit ought to be, um, ought to be fired, because if I was the commander of that missile battery and they published the grid coordinate where my missile battery was set up, I would be moving the missile battery for sure. Now, you could make a case that, well, the THAAD missile system is literally in the business of shooting down other missiles. And so if they put out the location of the missile battery and somebody like the Houthis fired a precision guided munition at it, big deal. The US would just shoot it down. But by publishing the exact location, you also give people, infiltrators, the ability to drive out there and home in using a GPS or even a cell phone on the area. That's a little bit more difficult because Israel has been jamming the GPS signals off and on around in different places around Israel since the war began. All the time that I've been there, if I'm driving around Israel and you get too close to Gaza, all of a sudden your GPS, your Google Maps will say that you're at the airport in Cairo. And you're like, what? And then if you turn around and drive back north and drive all the way up toward the northern border, when you get within about 5 kilometers or so of the northern border, it'll all of a sudden show your car to be at the airport in Beirut. This is all due to the jamming that Israel does to throw off missiles and things like that. But, I mean, any soldier worth his salt can take a grid coordinate and plot it on a paper map. That can't be jammed. Okay? Uh, I mean, I was taught to do that when I was in the military. So it's not surprising that Israel kicked Al Jazeera out of their country. This was months ago. The Israelis decided, all right, that's enough. Qatar had been doing things like that in Gaza far too much. They've got stringers acting as journalists who are literally members of Hamas running around Gaza and reporting, going live, reporting and saying, these Israeli tanks right behind me in this location at the corner of, blah, 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 in Gaza are doing such and so, whatever. But by doing that, they're putting out the exact location of Israeli troops, and they're putting Israeli troops in danger. And so the Israelis have said, yeah, it's enough of that. So they kicked the Qataris out of Gaza, out of Israel. And of course, the rest of the world body, including the United Nations, said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. How could they? They're against the free press. Now, look, I've had my own criticisms of the IDF, but if if you're a decent journalist and you have the permission to be there, they will let you report whatever you need to report from Israel. But what they ask is that you don't give away troop locations or troop strengths. So how many troops or where they are. So, for example, if I'm driving around Israel and I see a couple of tanks driving by, I can film them. It's okay. They're not going to kick me out for filming them. However, I'm smart enough not to publish that footage for at least 24 hours because after 24 hours, those tanks are going to be nowhere near where I filmed them. And then I can put that out. So if anybody were to look at my footage and go, oh, I know right where that is, they can't do anything to harm the Israelis or the IDF. Okay. I mean, it's just common sense. So, what is, how many troops do we have in Israel? I would say probably about 400 U.S. troops right now are serving in Israel. The 200 they had there were already there, and they were manning this radar array. Now, I did a bunch of research on it when I was there, and the large tower, radar tower that they have down there in the Negev is there to allow the United States to be able to uh, see the launches of any kind of ballistic missiles, especially intercontinental ballistic missiles, from anywhere in the region. And that radar array feeds into a network of similar arrays around the world so that the United States has a very good chance of picking up any threat to America long before it gets to our shores. This is why I say we don't really need an Iron Dome system. This is one of these things that it kind of bugs me a little bit because Trump really likes to make statements that are very politically um, exciting. They really jazz up his, the political base, um, but they're not very realistic. And so saying, yeah, we're going to have an Iron Dome system in the United States, we don't we don't need it, and that's because we have this radar system that's already in place around the world. So if Iran, for example, was going to fire a missile that's an intercontinental ballistic missile at the United States, we would know within moments of that thing being fired. We'd have hours to prepare, and we would be able to send up aircraft to shoot that missile down over the ocean before it got to the United States. Right? Our aircraft, our fighter aircraft, are the Iron Dome system that America needs. They're much more, well, they can do a lot more than just shoot down missiles, obviously, but they're really good at doing that. And so we don't need to spend a bunch of money on an anti-missile system in the United States. It just doesn't make any sense. But it sounds good. Yeah, boy, look at how good that worked in Israel. Yeah, we need one of them. Well, no, we don't. All right. So if you have any other questions, please go ahead and ask them in the chat. We'll mention once again that please uh, support CBN, especially here at the end of the year. CBN's budget dips a little bit toward the end of the year, and they could definitely make good use of any donations that you feel led to give. Go to cbn.com, and that'll help keep us in the field. I'm going to be going to Washington, D.C. to report on the inauguration on January 20th. I just booked my hotel room this morning. It's like $1,000 a night or something. I mean, very expensive, obviously, to be down there. And so every little bit helps. But I'll be going live from the inauguration, or more precisely, from the riots and protests that will be happening around the inauguration. I was there during Trump's first inauguration, and it was lit, let me tell you. So this is the 20th of January. I'll be there. And your donations to CBN help to send me there. So that's good. Also, as I mentioned before, go to uh, the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be live there talking about U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen. There are now reports coming out that U.S. and French special forces have troops in Yemen on the ground. And so this is a clear escalation of the conflict there. It I, I'll talk a lot more about it. I did a lot of research into it. Uh, Joe says a hypersonic missile from Russia gets here in less than 30 minutes. Okay, well, it takes about what 6-8 minutes to get a aircraft in the air, and Russia's hypersonic missiles are not as impressive as they are made out to be. We've seen them being used in Ukraine, and the Patriot missile systems we have in Kyiv have been able to shoot them down. So it is possible to shoot those things down. They're not as it's not as sure a thing to shoot them down as it would be with a more conventional warhead, but they're not all that accurate. They're not as nearly as accurate as they were made out to be either, but they're very fast. The United States is coming up with its own hypersonic missiles very soon. I'm going to do a live about that. I'm also going to, I just made a video that we're putting up at chuckholton.com and over at the Hot Zone about Russia's shadow fleet. Russia and Iran and China have been developing thousands of ships that fly under the radar, so to speak, and are being used in lots of nefarious ways to smuggle contraband, oil, most of all, between those countries, and to move weapons. And now we're finding out they're being used for sabotage. So I made a very in-depth video about that, and it'll be up over at the Hot Zone in the next 24 hours or so. Okay, so yeah, those are they're like shadow fleet of ships that are traversing the globe, and they're up to no good. And we're going to talk about that over on that other video. So, all right, I'm going to let you go here because I have to get ready for the live over on my channel. So again, go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton, and I'll be talking about U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen in just a few minutes. All right. So let's pray real quick, and we'll go. Lord God, we are grateful to you that you give us the opportunity to come together like this and learn about what's happening around the world. I pray that you'd give the leaders of Israel wisdom and discernment, and pray for healing for Benjamin Netanyahu as he just is recovering from surgery. And Lord, I pray that you would thwart the plans of evil men around the globe. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. God bless you, and we'll see you in a few minutes over at the Hot Zone. Goodbye.